Part 5, The Tower of Babylon by Ted Chiang. As they climbed higher up the tower, the sky grew lighter in color until one morning, Hilalem awoke and stood at the edge and yelled from shock. What had before seemed a pale sky now appeared to be a white ceiling stretched far above their heads. They were close enough now to perceive the vault of heaven, to see it as a solid carapace enclosing all the sky. All the miners spoke in hushed tones, staring up like idiots, while the tower dwellers laughed at them. As they continued to climb, they were startled at how near they actually were. The blankness of the vault's face had deceived them, making it undetectable until it appeared abruptly, seemingly just above their heads. Now, instead of climbing into the sky, they climbed up to a featureless plain that stretched endlessly in all directions. All of Hilalem's senses were disoriented by the sight of it. Sometimes when he looked at the vault, he felt as if the world had flipped around somehow, and if he lost his footing, he would fall upward to meet it. When the vault did appear to rest above his head, it had an oppressive weight. The vault was a stratum as heavy as all the world, yet utterly without support, and he feared what he never had in the mines, that the ceiling would collapse on him. Too, there were moments when it appeared as if the vault were a vertical cliff face of unimaginable height rising before him, and the dim earth behind him was another like it, and the tower was a cable stretched taut between the two. Or worst of all, for an instant it seemed that there was no up and no down, and his body did not know which way it was drawn towards. It was like fearing the height, but much worse. Often he would wake from an unrestful sleep to find himself sweating and his fingers cramped, trying to clutch the brick floor. Nani and many of the other miners were bleary-eyed too, though no one spoke of what disturbed their sleep. Their ascent grew slower instead of faster, as the foreman had expected. The sight of the vault inspired unease rather than eagerness. The regular pullers became impatient with them. Hilalem wondered what sort of people were forged by living under such conditions. How did they escape madness? Did they grow accustomed to this? Would the children born under a solid sky scream if they saw the ground beneath their feet? Perhaps men were not meant to live in such a place if their own natures restrained them from approaching heaven too closely. Then men should remain on earth. When they reached the summit of the tower, the disorientation faded. Or perhaps they had grown immune. Here, standing upon the square platform at the top, the miners gazed upon the most awesome scene ever glimpsed by men. Far below them lay a tapestry of soil and sea veiled by mist, rolling out in all directions to the limit of the eye. Just above them hung the roof of the world itself, the absolute upper demarcation of the sky, guaranteeing their vantage point as the highest possible. Here was as much creation as could be apprehended at once. The priests led a prayer to Yahweh. They gave thanks that they were permitted to see so much, and they begged forgiveness for the desire to see more. Easy, buddy. Easy. And at the top, the bricks were laid. One could catch the rich, raw smell of tar rising out of the heated cauldrons in which the lumps of bitumen were melted. It was the most earthy odor the miners had smelled in 4 months, and their nostrils were desperate to catch a whiff before it was whipped away by the wind. Here at the summit, where the ooze that had once seeped from the earth's cracks now grew solid to hold bricks in place, the earth was growing a limb into the sky. Here worked the bricklayers, the men smeared with bitumen who mixed the mortar and deftly set the heavy bricks with absolute precision. More than anyone else, these men could not permit themselves to experience dizziness. When they saw the vault, for the tower could not vary a finger's width from the vertical. They were nearing the end of their task. Finally, and after 4 months of climbing, the miners were ready to begin theirs. The Egyptians arrived shortly afterwards. They were dark of skin and slight of build and had sparsely bearded chins. They had pulled carts filled with dolerite hammers and bronze tools and wooden wedges. Their foreman was named Senmut, and he conferred with Beli, the Elamites' foreman, on how they would penetrate the vault. The Egyptians built a forge with what they had brought, as did the Elamites, for recasting the bronze tools that would be blunted during the mining. The vault itself remained just above a man's outstretched fingertips. It felt smooth and cool when one leapt up to touch it. It seemed to be made of fine-grained white granite, unmarred and utterly featureless. And therein lay the problem. Long ago, Yahweh had released the deluge, unleashing waters from both below and above. The waters of the abyss had burst forth from the springs of the earth, and the waters of heaven had poured through the sluice gates in the vault. Now men saw the vault closely, but there were no sluice gates discernible. They squinted at the surface in all directions, but no openings, no windows, no seams interrupted the granite plain. It seemed that their tower met the vault at a point between any reservoirs, which was fortunate indeed. If a sluice gate had been visible, they would have had to risk breaking it open and emptying the reservoir. This would mean rain for Shinar, out of season and heavier than the winter rains, and it would cause flooding along the Euphrates River. The rain would most likely end when the reservoir was emptied, but there was always the possibility that Yahweh would punish them and continue the rain until the tower fell and Babylon was dissolved into mud. Even though there were no visible gates, a risk still existed. Perhaps the gates had no seams perceptible to mortal eyes, and a reservoir lay directly above them, or perhaps the reservoirs were huge, so that even if the nearest sluice gates were many leagues away, a reservoir still lay above them. There was much debate over how to best proceed. Surely Yahweh will not wash away the tower, said one of the bricklayers. If the tower were sacrilege, Yahweh would have destroyed it earlier. Yet in all the centuries we've been working, we have never seen the slightest sign of Yahweh's displeasure. Yahweh will drain any reservoir before we penetrate it. If Yahweh looked upon this venture with such favor, there would already be a stairway ready made for us in the vault, said an Elamite. Yahweh will neither help nor hinder us. If we penetrate a reservoir, we will face the onrush of its waters. Hillelum could not keep his doubts silent at such a time. And if the waters are endless, he asked, Yahweh may not punish us, but Yahweh may allow us to bring our judgment upon ourselves. Elamite, even as a newcomer to the tower, you should know better than that. We labor for our love of Yahweh. We have done so for all our lives, and our fathers for generations back. Men as righteous as we could not be judged harshly. Is it true that we work with the purest of aims, but that doesn't mean we have worked wisely? Did men truly choose the correct path when we opted to live our lives away from the soil? Never has Yahweh said that the choice was proper. Now we stand ready to break open heaven, even when we know that water lies above us. If we are misguided, how can we be sure Yahweh will protect us from our own error? Hillelum advises caution, and I agree, said Beli. We must ensure that we do not bring a second deluge upon the world, nor even dangerous rains down upon Shinar. I have confirmed with Senmut of the Egyptians, and he has shown me designs which they have employed to seal the tombs of their kings. I believe their methods can provide us with safety when we begin digging. The priests sacrificed the ox and the goat in a ceremony in which many sacred words were spoken and much incense was burned, and the miners began work. Long before the miners reached the vault, it had been obvious that simple digging with hammers and picks would be impractical. Even if they were tunneling horizontally, they would make no more than 2 fingers' width of progress a day through granite, and tunneling upward would be far, far slower. Instead, they employed fire setting. With the wood they had brought, a bonfire was built below the chosen point of the vault, and fed steadily for a day. Before the heat of the flames, the stone cracked and spalled. After letting the fire burn out, the miners splashed water onto the stone to further the cracking process. Then they could break the stone into large pieces which fell heavily onto the tower. In this manner, they could progress the better part of a cubit for each day the fire burned. The tunnel did not rise straight up, but at an angle a staircase takes, so that they could build a ramp of steps up from the tower to meet it. The fire setting left the walls and floor smooth. The men built a frame of wooden steps so that they would not slide back down. They used a platform of baked bricks to support the bonfire at the tunnel's end. After the tunnel rose 10 cubits into the vault, they leveled it out and widened it to form a room. After the miners had removed all the stone that had been weakened by the fire, the Egyptians began work. They used no fire in their quarrying. They only used their dolerite, balls, and hammers and began to build a sliding door of granite. They first chipped away stone to cut an immense block of granite out of one wall. Hillelum and the other miners tried to help, but found it very difficult. One did not wear away the stone by grinding, but instead pounded chips off using hammer blows of one strength alone, and lighter or heavier ones would not do. After some weeks, the block was ready. It stood taller than a man and was even wider than that. To free it from the floor, they cut slots around the base of the stone and pounded in dry wooden wedges. Then they pounded thinner wedges into the first wedges to split them, and poured water into the cracks so that the wood would swell. In a few hours, a crack traveled into the stone, and the block was freed. And we will leave it there for now. Thanks for watching.